Attacks on parachutists within the law of war is when pilots, aircrews, and passengers are attacked while descending by parachutes from disabled aircraft during wartime. This practice is considered by most militaries around the world to be inhumane, barbaric, and unchivalrous, that it is unnecessary killing, that it is contrary to fair play, and that pilots have to be held to a higher standard. Attacking people parachuting from an aircraft in distress is a war crime under Protocol I in addition to the 1949 Geneva Conventions. However, it is not prohibited under the protocol to open fire on airborne forces who are descending by parachutes, even if their aircraft is in distress. International law. After World War I, a series of meetings were held at The Hague in 1922–23. Based on experiences and stories from fighter pilots who participated in the First World War, a commission of jurists attempted to codify this practice with the Hague Rules of Air Warfare. Article 20 prescribed that, when an aircraft has been disabled, the occupants, when endeavoring to escape by means of parachute, must not be attacked in the course of the descent. However, the Hague Rules of Air Warfare never came into force, and despite the strong feelings of chivalry regarding this issue, there was no legal prohibition on targeting parachuting enemy airmen before or during World War II. In 1949, as a result of widespread practices and abuses committed during the Second World War, the newly modified and updated versions of the Geneva Conventions came into force, providing greater protections to protected persons, but there was still no explicit prohibition on the shooting of parachuting enemy pilots. However, despite this, military manuals around the world contained prohibition on attacking enemy pilots parachuting from an aircraft in distress. Paragraph 30 of the United States Army's Field Manual, published by the Department of the Army on July 18, 1956, under the title, "The Law of Land Warfare," states, 30. Persons descending by parachute. The law of war does not prohibit firing upon paratroops or other persons who are or appear to be bound upon hostile missions while such persons are descending by parachute. Persons other than those mentioned in the preceding sentence who are descending by parachute from disabled aircraft may not be fired upon. In 1977, this practice was finally codified in Protocol I in addition to the 1949 Geneva Conventions. Article 42. Occupants of aircraft. 1. No person parachuting from an aircraft in distress shall be made the object of attack during his descent. 2. Upon reaching the ground in territory controlled by an adverse party, a person who has parachuted from an aircraft in distress shall be given an opportunity to surrender before being made the object of attack, unless it is apparent that he is engaging in a hostile act. 3. Airborne troops are not protected by this article. Not many states have ratified Protocol I, but it is an accepted principle of international humanitarian law that targeting persons other than airborne troops parachuting from an aircraft in distress is a violation of the customary laws of war and is binding on all belligerents, whether or not they have ratified them. First World War. This custom began during the First World War when fighter pilots were targeting manned enemy observation balloons. After shooting down a balloon, most pilots refrained from firing at the balloon observers as they escaped by parachute, because they felt it was inhumane and unchivalrous, a practice which only a few people could stomach. The extension of this courtesy to enemy pilots only began towards the very end of the First World War when parachutes were finally provided for pilots of fixed-wing aircraft. But it was again widely perceived that once a pilot had been forced to bail out of a damaged aircraft, Presuming they did not offer any further resistance, they were considered to have been honorably defeated in battle and should not be finished off as they escaped in a parachute, regardless of personal animosity toward the enemy or the strategic value of denying them reuse of the pilots. While this may have been true in some instances, it should be remembered that the tactical characteristics of the single-seat fighter in the First World War made ambush from the rear and above the most effective strategy. Seasoned aces tended to prioritize disabling the pilot via a concentrated burst of fire into the cockpit area on their first firing pass. This often left little opportunity for pilot escape, although there were certainly instances of long and skillfully conducted duels between equal opponents. The majority of kills achieved by the major aces were at the expense of fledgling pilots, barely able to control the planes. Thus, the average life expectancy of a new aviator on the Western Front was somewhere between 3 and 6 weeks. By July 1918, German and Austro-Hungarian Air Force parachute escapes had become routine. The Heinecker chutes the German and Austro-Hungarian pilots received were not perfect and sometimes failed to operate safely. Some were destroyed by fire before they could open, and occasionally, as they swayed gently down to earth, pilots faced the further peril of being shot at by Allied fighters. British flying ace James R. T. Jones had no compunction in doing this. My habit of attacking Huns dangling from parachutes led to many arguments in the mess, he said. Some officers of the Eton and Sandhurst type thought it unsportsmanlike. Never having been to a public school, I was unhampered by such considerations of form. I just pointed out that there was a bloody war on, and that I intended to avenge my pals.